My brother swapped my insulin with saline for 3 weeks to make me seem unstable in our father's estate battle. I almost died. I woke up on the bathroom floor at 3:18 a.m. with paramedics strapping an oxygen mask to my face, and my brother standing in the doorway with his phone out filming. Not helping. Filming. My blood sugar was 612. The normal range is 80 to 120. At 600, you start going into diabetic ketoacidosis. At 700, you die. The lead paramedic kept asking me when I'd last taken my insulin, and I kept telling him 4 hours ago, right before bed, same as every night for the past 11 years. He looked at my brother. My brother looked at his phone, and something in that exchange made my skin go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the medical crisis actively killing me. The estate battle had started 6 weeks earlier when our father died of a sudden heart attack at 63, leaving behind a commercial real estate portfolio worth approximately $4.3 million. Dad's will split everything 50-50 between me and my brother Ethan. Simple, clean, fair. Except Ethan had been Dad's business partner for the last 8 years, while I'd been teaching high school chemistry 3 states away. Ethan had access to all the accounts, all the properties, all the paperwork. He'd been living in Dad's house since the funeral, supposedly organizing everything for probate. I'd driven down from Michigan to our hometown of Columbus, Ohio, 2 weeks after Dad died to stay at the house during the estate settlement. That's when things started getting strange with my diabetes. I'm 34 years old. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 23, right after graduating from college. It's been part of my routine for over a decade now. I know my body. I know the warning signs of high blood sugar, excessive thirst, frequent urination, blurred vision, fatigue. I know what good control feels like versus bad control, and I'd had excellent control for years. My last A1C test 3 months before Dad died was 6.2, which is nearly perfect for a diabetic. My endocrinologist, Dr. Raymond Kushner out of Ann Arbor Medical Center, had literally congratulated me at my last appointment. So when I started experiencing symptoms of hypoglycemia, despite taking my insulin religiously, I told myself it was stress. Grief does strange things to your body. Cortisol levels spike, sleep patterns get disrupted, eating habits change. It made sense that my blood sugar would be harder to control, except it wasn't just harder to control. It was completely uncontrollable. I'd check my blood sugar before taking my nighttime injection of long-acting insulin. Let's say it was 140, slightly elevated but manageable. I'd inject my usual dose of 32 units, the same dose I'd been taking for 2 years. Then I'd check again in the morning, expecting it to be somewhere around 90 to 110. Instead, it would be 380 or 420 or 511. Numbers I hadn't seen since I was first diagnosed and didn't know how to manage the disease yet. Numbers that made no sense given my insulin dosing. I started checking my blood sugar every 2 hours, even setting alarms to wake up during the night. The pattern was consistent and terrifying. My insulin just wasn't working. I called Dr. Kushner's office on a Thursday morning after a particularly bad night where my blood sugar had hit 489. I spoke with his nurse practitioner, Laura Funn, who'd been managing my care for the past 18 months. She asked all the right questions. Had I changed my diet? No. Was I sick with an infection? No. Was I under unusual stress? Well, yes. My father had just died and I was dealing with his estate. She explained that stress hormones could absolutely cause insulin resistance, making my usual doses less effective. She increased my nighttime long-acting dose from 32 units to 40 units and told me to call back in 3 days if things didn't improve. They didn't improve. They got worse. Ethan was being incredibly helpful during this time. He'd noticed I wasn't feeling well and kept asking if there was anything he could do. He'd bring me bottles of water when I mentioned being thirsty. He'd offer to make dinner so I could rest. He'd ask about my blood sugar numbers and shake his head sympathetically when I told him how high they were. One night, he sat with me in the kitchen while I prepared my injection. "Is it scary?" he asked, watching me draw insulin from the vial into the syringe, knowing you have to do this every single day or you'll die. I told him, "You get used to it. You don't really think about the stakes anymore. It becomes routine, like brushing your teeth." He nodded slowly, staring at the vial of insulin on the counter. "Where do you keep that?" "In the fridge." I told him, "Yes, in the door of the upstairs bathroom fridge, the small one Dad had installed when Mom was sick." Ethan knew that he'd lived in this house, but he asked anyway. The estate lawyer, Thomas Grayfield from Grayfield and Associates, scheduled our first official meeting for a Monday morning 3 weeks after I'd arrived. By that point, I was feeling genuinely terrible. The sustained high blood sugar was causing all kinds of secondary symptoms. Constant fatigue, difficulty concentrating, blurred vision that made reading documents painful, frequent trips to the bathroom that disrupted the meeting multiple times. Grayfield kept pausing his explanation of the probate process to ask if I needed a break. I kept apologizing and saying I was fine, just dealing with some health issues. Ethan sat across the conference table with his hands folded, looking concerned and patient. "Maybe we should reschedule," he suggested after my third bathroom break. "You clearly aren't feeling well." Grayfield agreed that might be best. We rescheduled for the following Monday. I left that meeting feeling humiliated and frustrated. I'd looked incompetent in front of our father's lawyer. Worse, I'd looked unstable. simple, like I couldn't handle basic adult responsibilities. That evening, I increased my insulin dose without calling Dr. Kushner's office first. I took 50 units instead of 40. It was reckless and potentially dangerous to make that big of a jump without medical supervision, but I was desperate. I needed to get my blood sugar under control before the next meeting with Grayfield. I couldn't afford to look like I was falling apart during the estate proceedings. That night, my blood sugar before bed was 352. The next morning, it was 534. I'd taken 50 units of long-acting insulin, and my blood sugar had gone up by 182 points. That's not how insulin works. That's not how any of this works. Something was wrong with me. Something beyond stress or grief or insulin resistance. I made an appointment with a local endocrinologist, Dr. Rachel Owens, at Columbus Diabetes Associates, and got in 2 days later by explaining it was an emergency. Dr. Owens was in her early 50s, with gray stray hair, and the kind of calm, analytical demeanor you want in a specialist dealing with a medical crisis. She reviewed my blood sugar logs, my insulin dosing records, and my recent A1C test from Michigan. Then she examined me, checking my injection sites for signs of lipohypertrophy, which is scar tissue that can prevent proper insulin absorption. Everything looked fine. She ordered comprehensive blood work, including a septide test to measure my pancreatic function, screening for other hormone imbalances, and a test to rule out insulin antibodies. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said, pulling off her examination gloves. "This presentation doesn't make physiological sense. You should be responding to these insulin doses. We need to figure out why you're not." The blood work came back within 48 hours. Everything was normal. My pancreas wasn't producing any insulin, which was expected for type 1 diabetes. My thyroid function was normal. No infection, no hormone imbalances, no insulin antibodies. Dr. Owens called me personally to discuss the results. "I want you to come back in and bring your insulin vials," she said. "All of them. The ones you're currently using and any backups you have. I want to test them." I asked what she thought was wrong. There was a long pause on the line. "I don't want to speculate until we rule out environmental factors," she said carefully. "But if your insulin is being stored improperly or if there's been any contamination, that could explain why it's not working. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I said yes. I gathered all my insulin vials that evening. I had 3. The one I was currently using from the bathroom fridge, a backup in the same fridge, and an unopened one in my travel case that I'd brought from Michigan. I lined them up on my dresser to take to Dr. Owens in the morning. Then I went downstairs to make dinner. Ethan was in the kitchen looking at his phone. "You okay?" he asked, glancing up. "You've seemed stressed lately." I told him I was fine, just frustrated with my blood sugar issues. He nodded sympathetically. "Well, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. We're in this together, right? Dad would have wanted us to take care of each other." I thanked him and heated up leftovers. After dinner, I went back upstairs to prepare my nighttime injection. When I reached for the vials on my dresser, the backup vial was in a different position than I'd left it. Not dramatically different, just slightly shifted, maybe an inch to the left. The kind of thing you might not notice if you weren't paying attention. My hands started shaking. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself the stress of Dad's death and the estate proceedings and my medical issues was making me see conspiracy where there was none. I told myself Ethan wouldn't do something like that. He was my brother. We'd grown up together. We'd shared a room until I went to college. He'd been there when I was first diagnosed with diabetes, helping me learn to manage injections and blood sugar testing. He'd called me every few months just to check in, asking how I was doing, whether my diabetes was under control. He cared about me. But I also remembered something Dad had said about a year before he died. During one of our phone calls, he'd mentioned that Ethan had been pushing to change the business structure to make Ethan the primary owner with Dad as a silent partner. Dad had refused. "I built this company," he'd said. "I'm not signing it away while I'm still alive and capable." Ethan had been angry about that decision. Really angry. I didn't take my insulin that night. Instead, I went to a 24-hour pharmacy and bought 3 new vials using my insurance. They were expensive, about $90 each, even with coverage, but I needed to know. I needed to rule out the possibility that something was wrong with my current supply. I took my nighttime dose using one of the brand new pharmacy vials. My blood sugar before the injection was 368. When I woke up the next morning and checked again, it was 112. Normal, healthy, exactly where it should be. After a proper dose of long-acting insulin, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the glucose meter display, feeling cold spread through my entire body. The insulin from the pharmacy worked. The insulin from my bathroom fridge didn't, which meant someone had tampered with my medication. I called Dr. Owens and told her I'd figured out the problem. She asked what I meant. I explained about buying new insulin from the pharmacy and getting a normal result for the first time in weeks. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Bring in your old vials. All of them. Today, if possible. I'm going to have them analyzed by our lab, and I'm also going to file a report with the Ohio Board of Pharmacy. If your medication was tampered with, this is a serious crime." I promised to come in within the hour. Then I went to the bathroom fridge to get the vials. The current one I'd been using was still there. The backup vial was gone. I'd seen it the night before on my dresser. Now it wasn't anywhere in the bathroom or my bedroom. I searched for 20 minutes before accepting the obvious truth. Someone had taken it. Someone who knew I was becoming suspicious. Someone who had access to this house and my belongings. belongings. Someone who was my brother. I drove to Dr. Owens's office with the remaining 2 vials. The one I'd been actively using, and the unopened one from my Michigan travel case. Dr. Owens met me in an exam room wearing a concerned expression that made her look older than she had during our first appointment. She took the vials and handed them to a lab technician who documented them with photographs and chain of custody forms. These will go to Ohio State's medical forensics lab, Dr. Owens explained. They can analyze the contents and determine if there's been any substitution or contamination. The process takes about 3 to 5 business days. I asked what she thought happened. She chose her words carefully. In my 15 years practicing endocrinology, I've seen 2 cases of medication tampering. Both involved family members with financial motivations. I can't make accusations, but I can tell you that someone with access to your insulin could easily replace it with saline solution or another clear liquid. The vials look identical. Without sophisticated testing, you'd never know. I didn't go back to Dad's house that night. I checked into a Holiday in downtown and paid cash because I didn't want Ethan to be able to track my credit card. I sat in the hotel room reviewing everything that had happened over the past 3 weeks. The timing of my blood sugar issues, they'd started right around when I arrived to stay at the house. Ethan's unusual attentiveness, bringing me water, asking about my diabetes management, watching me prepare injections, his question about where I stored my insulin, information he already knew, but asked anyway. The rescheduled estate meeting, I'd looked incompetent and unstable, exactly the kind of person whose judgment might be questioned in probate court. The missing backup vial taken the night I became suspicious, and underlying everything, the financial motive, $4.3 million split between 2 brothers, unless one brother could be declared incompetent to manage his inheritance. I called the Columbus Police non-emergency line and asked to speak with someone about a potential attempted murder. The dispatcher connected me to Detective Liam Burton from the Major Crimes Unit. Burton had been with CPD for 19 years, according to the brief biography he gave me when we met the next morning at the station. He was in his mid-40s with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many family betrayals. I told him everything. Dad's death, the estate worth millions, my inexplicable blood sugar crisis, the insulin that stopped working, the missing backup vial, the pharmacy insulin that worked perfectly. Burton listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Do you still have access to your father's house?" he asked. I said, "Yes, I still had my key." "Don't go back there alone," Burton said. "If what you're describing is accurate, your brother attempted to kill you. The fact that he's filming your medical emergencies suggests he's documenting your supposed instability for legal purposes. This is premeditated. This is sophisticated. This is someone who's planned every step." Detective Burton assigned Officer Kai Nakamura to accompany me back to the house to retrieve my belongings and any evidence. Nakamura was younger, maybe late 20s, with the kind of intense focus that made you feel both protected and slightly nervous. We arrived at the house at 11 a.m. on a Friday. Ethan's car was gone. I let us in with my key and went straight upstairs to the bathroom. The insulin vial I'd been using was still in the fridge door. Nakamura photographed it in place, then carefully bagged it as evidence, documenting everything with a body camera. We searched my bedroom next. In the trash can beside my dresser, buried under crumpled papers and tissues, Nakamura found an empty insulin vial. Not one of mine. An extra vial discarded carelessly by someone who thought it would be taken out with the regular trash. Nakamura bagged that too. Then we searched Ethan's room. I felt guilty about that. Invasive. Like I was violating some fundamental boundary of trust between brothers. But Nakamura was methodical and professional, checking drawers and closets with practiced efficiency. In Ethan's bedside table, underneath a stack of financial documents related to Dad's estate, Nakamura found a box of saline solution vials, the kind used for wound irrigation or medical procedures. The kind that looks exactly like insulin if you're not paying attention to the label. Nakamura held up the box without touching it directly, using a pen to flip open the lid. 3 vials were missing from the original packaging of 12. Nakamura photographed everything from multiple angles, then bagged the entire box. "We'll test these against your insulin vials," he said. "If the contents match, we have physical evidence of substitution. Combined with the medical documentation from your doctor, this becomes a prosecutable case." We were loading the evidence into Nakamura's patrol car when Ethan's vehicle pulled into the driveway. He got out slowly, looking between me, the uniformed officer, and the evidence bags with an expression that cycled through confusion, concern, and something else. Something calculated. "What's going on?" he asked, directing the question at me rather than Nakamura. "Is everything okay? Did something happen?" I didn't say anything. Nakamura stepped forward with his badge visible. "I'm Officer Nakamura with Columbus PD. We're collecting evidence related to an ongoing investigation. Do you live at this residence?" Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving my face. "This is my father's house. My brother and I are both staying here while we settle the estate." "What investigation? What evidence?" Nakamura didn't answer. Instead, he asked Ethan to step aside while we finished loading the vehicle. Ethan complied, but I could see his mind working, trying to figure out what I knew and what I could prove. Detective Burton called me that evening with preliminary results from Ohio State's medical forensics lab. They'd fast-tracked the analysis given the attempted murder allegations. The vial you were actively using, Burton said, contains approximately 70% saline solution and 30% insulin. Not enough insulin to be therapeutically effective, but enough that you wouldn't immediately recognize something was wrong. The saline dilution explains why your blood sugar kept rising, despite taking what you thought were adequate doses. The unopened vial from your travel case is pure insulin, no tampering, and the empty vial we found in your trash matches the saline solution boxes in your brother's room. Same manufacturer, same lot number. I asked what happened next. Now we build the case, Burton said. We have physical evidence, medical documentation, and opportunity. What we need is motive testimony and any evidence showing your brother's financial interest in you appearing incompetent. I contacted Thomas Grayfield, the estate attorney, and requested copies of all correspondence between him and Ethan from the past 6 weeks. Grayfield was professionally reluctant until I explained there was an active police investigation into potential estate fraud and attempted murder. That changed his tone considerably. He sent over the emails within 2 hours. There were 37 messages total. Most were routine questions about probate procedures and property valuations, but 5 messages sent over the course of 2 weeks expressed concerns about my capability to manage my inheritance. The first email sent 3 days after I arrived at the house. I'm worried about my brother's health. He seems very disorganized and is having trouble managing his diabetes. Is there a process for medical evaluation if one heir appears unable to handle financial responsibilities? The second email 5 days later. My brother had to leave our meeting multiple times due to health issues and seemed confused about basic estate details. I want to make sure he's protected, even if that means additional oversight of his portion. The pattern continued, each message carefully documenting my apparent decline while positioning Ethan as the concerned, responsible sibling trying to protect both of us. Dr. Owens provided a comprehensive medical report detailing my 11-year history of excellent diabetes management, my recent unexplained hypoglycemia crisis, and the immediate normalization of my blood sugar once I switched to uncompromised insulin. Based on the patient's medical history and the laboratory confirmation of insulin tampering, she wrote in her conclusion, "It is my professional opinion that the patient's hypoglycemic episodes were iatrogenically induced through intentional medication substitution. Without intervention, the patient would have progressed to diabetic ketoacidosis, coma, and likely death within days to weeks." She detached my blood sugar logs, showing the dramatic contrast between the 3 weeks of using tampered insulin and the immediate improvement with pharmacy insulin. The documentation was damning and irrefutable. Detective Burton brought Ethan in for questioning on a Monday morning, exactly 4 weeks after the paramedics had found me unconscious on the bathroom floor. I wasn't present for the interview, but Burton recorded everything and played portions back for me later. Ethan maintained his innocence throughout, claiming he had no idea how saline solution ended up in his bedside table, suggesting maybe I'd planted it there to frame him out of grief-induced paranoia. He said he'd been nothing but supportive during my health crisis, that his emails to the estate attorney were genuine expressions of concern, not attempts to undermine my competency. When Burton confronted him with the laboratory evidence proving the insulin had been tampered with, Ethan suggested maybe the pharmacy had made a mistake, or maybe my diabetes had just progressed to a more severe stage. His explanations grew increasingly desperate and contradictory as the interview continued. The breakthrough came when Burton asked Ethan about the video footage, the footage from my medical emergency, which Ethan had filmed on his phone instead of helping. "Why were you recording your brother during a medical crisis?" Burton asked. There was a long silence on the recording. Then Ethan said something that destroyed any remaining pretense of innocence. "I needed documentation for the estate proceedings to show he wasn't capable of managing his portion." Burton asked him to clarify. "Documentation of what specifically?" Another pause. "Of his mental state, his instability." The lawyer said it would be helpful if there were concerns about competency. Burton pressed further. "So, you were documenting your brother's medical emergencies to use against him in a state court, and you saw no reason to help him instead." Ethan realized his mistake too late. He tried to backtrack, claiming he'd called 911 first before recording that he'd only filmed for a few seconds. But the damage was done. He'd admitted to documenting my crisis for legal advantage rather than providing help. The Ohio prosecutor's office filed charges 3 days later. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, the tampered insulin qualified as a weapon under Ohio law, and estate fraud. The prosecutor, Jennifer Knowles, had spent 12 years in major crimes and had a reputation for being thorough and merciless with white-collar criminals who hurt family members. She scheduled a preliminary hearing for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, Detective Burton executed a search warrant for all of Ethan's electronic devices, his phone, laptop, tablet, and cloud storage accounts. The digital forensics team found things that made the case even worse. Ethan had researched insulin tampering methods 3 weeks before Dad died. He'd visited forums discussing how to induce diabetic crises without being detected. He'd researched estate competency laws and medical conservatorship procedures. He'd even calculated how long it would take for sustained hypoglycemia to cause permanent organ damage damage or death. Every search, every calculation, every research query had been saved in his browser history like a roadmap of premeditated attempted murder. But the most damaging evidence came from Ethan's text messages with his girlfriend, someone named Rebecca Elton, who worked in medical billing at a local hospital. The messages went back 6 months to before Dad's death. In them, Ethan complained about having to share the estate 50-50 when he'd done all the work building Dad's business. He wrote things like, "Why should he get half when he's been gone for years, and there has to be a way to contest the will?" Rebecca had apparently suggested using my diabetes against me. Doesn't he have to take insulin every day? What if something happened with that? Like if he seemed really sick or unstable? Ethan's response, "That's genius. If he can't manage his own health, how can he manage millions of dollars?" The text chain continued over weeks, with Rebecca providing information about insulin storage and effectiveness, Ethan planning when to make the switch, and both of them discussing how to document my decline for legal purposes. The preliminary hearing was brief and brutal. Prosecutor Knowles presented the physical evidence, the medical documentation, the text messages, and the search history. Ethan's attorney, a public defender named Gregory Finch, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted, argued that the case was circumstantial, that the text messages were taken out of context, that Ethan's research could have been motivated by genuine concern for my health. Judge Angela Thornton, who'd been on the bench for 26 years and had presided over some of Ohio's most notorious family crime cases, wasn't buying it. "Counsel," she said, removing her glasses and addressing Finch directly, "your client researched how to make someone diabetic appear unstable, purchased the materials to tamper with medication, had access to the victim's medication storage, exchanged texts, planning this exact scenario, and filmed the resulting medical crisis instead of providing aid. At what point does this stop being circumstantial and start being a clear pattern of intentional harm?" She bound Ethan over for trial with bail set at $500,000. He couldn't make bail. He stayed in county lockup, awaiting trial. The estate proceedings took a different turn after the charges were filed. Thomas Grayfield filed a motion to pause probate pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Ohio has a slayer statute that prevents criminals from inheriting from their victims. And while Dad's death itself was natural causes, the argument was that Ethan's attempt to murder me for my inheritance disqualified him from benefiting from Dad's estate. Judge Thornton agreed to pause the proceedings until the criminal case concluded. In the meantime, the court appointed a neutral third-party administrator to manage Dad's properties and accounts. I was relieved. I didn't want the money anymore. I just wanted to understand how my brother, someone I'd grown up with and trusted completely, could look at me and see nothing but an obstacle to wealth. The trial took place 4 months after my near-death experience. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. Dr. Owens testified about the medical impossibility of my blood sugar crisis occurring naturally given my history. Dr. Kushner, my Michigan endocrinologist, testified via video about my years of excellent control. The Ohio State forensic chemist testified about the insulin dilution and saline substitution. Detective Burton testified about finding the empty vial in my trash and the saline boxes in Ethan's room. Officer Nakamura testified about the evidence collection. The digital forensic specialist testified about Ethan's research history and text messages. And I testified about watching my brother film me during a medical emergency instead of helping, about the missing backup insulin vial, about realizing someone I loved had spent weeks systematically poisoning me. Ethan's defense was weak and desperate. Attorney Finch tried to argue that Rebecca Elton had been the mastermind, that she'd manipulated Ethan into this scheme, that he'd just been going along with her suggestions without really understanding the consequences. The jury didn't buy it. Ethan was 36 years old, a successful businessman who'd co-managed a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. He wasn't some naive victim led astray by a girlfriend. The text messages showed him actively planning, researching, and executing the medication tampering. Rebecca was charged separately as an accomplice and took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Ethan in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony was devastating. She described how Ethan had asked her for advice about making someone look medically unreliable, how he'd specifically mentioned my diabetes as a vulnerability, how he'd laughed about me getting sicker while he documented everything for the estate case. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder in the first degree, assault with a deadly weapon, estate fraud. Judge Thornton scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. When that day came, she delivered a statement that I'll remember for the rest of my life. "Mr. Lawson," she said, addressing Ethan directly as he stood in his orange jumpsuit and restraints, "you looked at your brother and saw only money. You took his trust, his love, and his medical vulnerability and weaponized them in service of greed. You researched how to kill him slowly enough that it would look like natural causes or medical mismanagement. You documented his suffering not to help, but to use against him. You stole weeks of his life and nearly stole all of it. This court finds your actions to be among the most callous and calculated it has encountered." She sentenced him to 23 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Rebecca Elton got 7 years for conspiracy and accomplice to attempted murder. The estate proceedings resumed after the conviction. Under Ohio's Slayer statute, Ethan was disqualified from inheriting anything from Dad's estate. His entire 50% share reverted to me by default. I inherited everything. The properties, the business, the bank accounts, all $4.3 million, plus the appreciation that had occurred during the 8 months of legal proceedings. Thomas Grayfield handled the final transfer with professional efficiency. When he handed me the last document to sign, he said something that struck me as both true and terrible. Your father built this legacy to provide for both his sons. It must break his heart, wherever he is, to know one son tried to murder the other for it. I signed the papers and walked out of Grayfield's office as the sole heir to everything Dad had worked for, and all I felt was empty. I moved back to Michigan 2 weeks later. I couldn't stay in Columbus, couldn't live in Dad's house where my brother had spent weeks slowly poisoning me while I slept down the hall. I sold the house and most of the properties, keeping only 2 small commercial buildings that generated steady rental income. The money went into trust accounts managed by financial advisors I'd never met, people with no connection to my family or our history. I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to manage it, didn't want the wealth that had almost killed me. I went back to teaching high school chemistry. My students had no idea what I'd been through. They just knew me as Mr. Lawson, the teacher who sometimes used diabetes management as an example when teaching about biochemistry and molecular interactions. Dr. Kushner recommended I see a therapist to process everything that had happened. I started seeing Dr. Monica Alvarez, a trauma specialist in Ann Arbor who'd worked with victims of family violence. The first few sessions were just me trying to articulate how it felt to realize my brother had watched me get sicker and done nothing, had actively made me sicker, had filmed my near-death experience like it was content for his legal case. Dr. Alvarez helped me understand that betrayal trauma is different from other types of trauma because it destroys your baseline ability to trust. You have to rebuild your sense of safety from the ground up. She said, you have to learn that what happened with your brother was specific to him, not representative of all relationships or all family bonds. It took months before I could even begin to believe that. I still check my insulin obsessively. Every vial gets inspected before use. I bought a small safe for my medication, and I'm the only one with the combination. I test my blood sugar more frequently than necessary, paranoid that somehow the numbers will start climbing again, even though I know rationally that I'm using uncompromised insulin from sealed pharmacy containers. The trauma left marks that go beyond the physical. My current A1C is back to 6.4, excellent control, according to Dr. Kushner. But the psychological cost of what Ethan did can't be measured in blood glucose levels or hemoglobin markers. I visited Ethan in prison once, about a year after his conviction. I don't know why I went. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I needed to hear him explain how he justified it to himself. Maybe I needed to see him in that gray prison uniform and understand that justice had been served. We sat across from each other in the visitation room with a plexiglass barrier between us and phones connecting our voices. He looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by incarceration. I asked him why. Why had he done it? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I convinced myself you didn't deserve it. Half of everything Dad built. You left, went to Michigan, became a teacher. I stayed here, worked with him every day, learned the business. In my mind, I'd earned it all and you'd earned nothing. The money became more important than you being alive. I don't know when that happened, but it did. I asked if he was sorry. He nodded. Every single day, but that doesn't change anything, does it? I told him, no, it didn't. Then I hung up the phone and left. I haven't been back. The weird thing about surviving attempted murder by a family member is that people don't know how to talk to you about it. They offer condolences like you've lost someone to natural causes. They say things like, at least he's in prison now, as if incarceration equals healing. They avoid asking questions because they don't want to be intrusive, so you end up carrying the story alone. My colleagues at the high school know what happened. It made local news in Michigan too, but no one mentions it. I'm just the chemistry teacher who takes insulin before lunch and sometimes zones out during faculty meetings because I'm remembering what it felt like to wake up with paramedics strapping a mask to my face while my brother stood in the doorway filming. Dr. Alvarez says, I'm making progress. I've started dating again cautiously and with significant trust issues that I'm upfront about from the start. I've reconnected with friends I'd pulled away from during the estate proceedings. I've established new routines that feel safe and controllable. But there are still moments when the weight of everything crashes down, like when I'm preparing my nighttime injection and I have a flash of panic wondering if the insulin is real, or when I pass estate planning offices and remember sitting in Grayfield's conference room feeling like I was dying while my brother calmly documented my incompetence for legal advantage, or when I see news stories about families torn apart by inheritance disputes, and I think about how Dad never could have imagined his estate would become my attempted murder weapon. The money from Dad's estate sits in accounts I rarely access. I live on my teacher's salary, about $64,000 a year, which is enough for a decent apartment and a reliable car, and the occasional weekend trip. The inheritance feels like blood money, tainted by what Ethan did to get it. But Dr. Alvarez reminds me that Dad wanted me to have it, that using it doesn't mean accepting what Ethan did, that I'm allowed to benefit from my father's legacy without carrying guilt for my brother's crimes. Rationally, I understand that. Emotionally, I'm still working on it. I've started using small amounts to fund diabetes research at the Ohio State Medical School and to support programs teaching high school students about science and medicine. If Dad's money has to be part of my life, at least it can do some good. Sometimes I wonder if Ethan thinks about what he lost. Not the inheritance or the properties or the business partnership with Dad. Those are just money and assets. I wonder if he thinks about losing a brother. If he remembers the years before greed made me into a target instead of family. We used to be close, or I thought we were. We'd call each other every few months to catch up. We'd visit during holidays when our schedules aligned. He'd helped me through my diabetes diagnosis, learning about the disease alongside me so he could understand what I was dealing with. Or maybe that was research too. Maybe he was always calculating, always looking for advantages, always seeing relationships as transactions. I'll never know which memories were real and which were strategy. Judge Thornton's words come back to me often. You looked at your brother and saw only money. That's what haunts me most. Not the physical danger, not even the betrayal itself, but the reduction of everything we'd been to each other down to a dollar amount. $215 million to be exact. That's what my half of the estate was worth. That's what Ethan decided was worth watching me die. The math is simple and horrifying. My life, my trust, our shared childhood, our father's love for both of us. All of it calculated and found less valuable than money. You can't come back from understanding that. You can't unknow that equation. I still have the glucometer reading from that first morning after using the pharmacy insulin. 112. Normal. Safe. Proof that my body wasn't failing. That my diabetes hadn't suddenly become uncontrollable. That the crisis was manufactured. I kept the print out in a drawer for months, looking at it sometimes when I needed to remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That my suspicions had been justified. That the person who tried to kill me was actually imprisoned for it and not walking around free. Dr. Alvarez eventually suggested I let go of that printout, that holding on to physical evidence was keeping me stuck in survival mode when I needed to move toward recovery. I threw it away, but I still remember the number 112, the proof that saved my life. The criminal case made local news, but never went national. Ohio teachers didn't recognize my name or my story when I returned to Michigan. I was grateful for that anonymity. I could rebuild my life without carrying the label of that guy whose brother tried to kill him for inheritance money. My students know me as someone who explains molecular bonds with enthusiasm and occasionally brings in donuts for the class. My neighbors know me as the quiet guy in Unit 3B who's pleasant in the elevator and always sorts his recycling correctly. My therapist knows the full story, and a few close friends know the outline. But most of my world is built on normal interactions that have nothing to do with attempted murder or family betrayal or estate fraud. That normally is precious and hard-won. There are good days now. Days where I don't think about Ethan, or the tampered insulin, or the paramedics finding me on the bathroom floor. Days where my diabetes is just a manageable chronic condition rather than a weapon someone used against me. Days where I can enjoy teaching chemistry without the irony of explaining how molecules interact while remembering that someone used molecular manipulation to try to kill me. Those days are increasing in frequency, and Dr. Alvarez says that's the definition of healing. Not forgetting what happened, but reducing how much space it takes up in your daily existence. I'm working on that. Some days are easier than others. I keep Dad's watch, the one Mom gave him on their 20th anniversary. Ethan hadn't wanted it during the estate division because it wasn't worth much monetarily, just a regular Seiko with a leather band worn from years of daily use. But it was Dad's, and wearing it makes me feel connected to the parent who loved both of his sons and never imagined one would try to murder the other. Sometimes I wonder what Dad would say if he knew what happened. Whether he'd understand how money corrupted Ethan, whether he'd blame himself for building an estate valuable enough to kill for, whether he'd forgive either of us, me for surviving and keeping everything, Ethan for attempting murder and losing everything. I'll never know. Dad died thinking his sons would take care of each other after he was gone. Instead, one of us tried to kill the other before the funeral flowers had wilted. I got a letter from Ethan last month. The prison screened it and forwarded it to my attorney first protocol for contact between criminals and their victims. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, full of apologies and regrets and explanations that didn't really explain anything. He wrote about the moment he decided to tamper with my insulin, how he'd convinced himself it was just to make me look unreliable for a few weeks, not to actually kill me, how things had spiraled beyond his original intent, how he wished he could take it back, how he understood if I never forgave him, how he hoped I was doing okay and managing my diabetes well. The cognitive dissonance of that last line, hoping I'm managing the disease he'd weaponized against me, would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. My attorney asked if I wanted to respond. I said, no, what would I even say? Some betrayals are too profound for communication to bridge. Next month marks 3 years since the night I woke up on the bathroom floor with my blood sugar at 612. 3 years since my brother filmed my near death instead of helping. 3 years since I learned that the person who'd grown up sharing a room with me could look at me and see only an obstacle to wealth. Dr. Alvarez says anniversaries of trauma are difficult, that I should expect the memories to feel more intense as the date approaches. She's right. I've been having more nightmares lately. Dreams where I'm checking my blood sugar and the numbers keep climbing no matter how much insulin I take. Dreams where I'm searching for the tampered vials but can't find them. Dreams where I'm trying to tell someone what's happening, but no one believes me. I wake up and check my glucometer immediately, confirming that my blood sugar is normal, that the insulin is working, that I'm safe. It takes a while for my heart rate to settle. The inheritance money funded a diabetes education program at my high school. I worked with the district to create a comprehensive curriculum teaching students about metabolic disorders, insulin function, and the daily realities of chronic disease management. We bring in endocrinologists to speak, demonstrate continuous glucose monitors, and explain how modern medicine allows diabetics to live normal lives. I don't tell the students why I started this program or what happened with my brother. I just teach them that diabetes is manageable, that insulin is life-saving, and that understanding biochemistry can literally save lives. One of my students, a girl named Ashley, who was diagnosed with type 1 last year, told me the program helped her feel less alone and less afraid. That made everything feel slightly more bearable. Dad's money filtered through Ethan's crime and my survival, helping a 15-year-old girl understand she's going to be okay. It's not redemption, but it's something. I still teach chemistry. I still take my insulin. I still check my blood sugar religiously. I still see Dr. Alvarez every week. I still avoid Columbus and anything associated with Dad's estate. I still have nightmares about my brother standing in the doorway with his phone out filming, but I'm alive. That's the irreducible fact underneath everything else. Ethan tried to kill methodically and deliberately over the course of 3 weeks. He researched it, planned it, executed it, and documented it, and I'm still here. That survival doesn't erase the trauma or heal the betrayal, but it matters. Judge Thornton said Ethan stole weeks of my life and nearly stole all of it, but he didn't. He's in prison serving 23 years, and I'm in Michigan teaching students about molecular bonds and living a quiet life he tried to take from me. The last thing Dr. Alvarez said in our most recent session was about reclaiming narrative. Your brother wrote a story where you were an obstacle to be removed. She said, but you're writing a different story now. One where you're a survivor, a teacher, someone who took incomprehensible betrayal and transformed it into advocacy and education. That's your narrative. That's your power. I'm still figuring out what that means in practice. Some days I feel powerful, like I've overcome something tremendous and emerged stronger. Other days I feel broken, like the trust Ethan shattered left cracks that will never fully heal. Both things are probably true. Both narratives exist simultaneously. I'm a survivor and I'm wounded. I inherited everything and I lost my brother. I'm safe now and I'll never feel completely safe again. That's the reality of living after attempted murder by family. You carry all of it forward, the survival and the scars, and you build whatever life you can from what remains. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So, subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.